This is Novosibirsk. It's a city in Russia that at the first glance looks like any other Soviet metropolis. Millions of people live here in endless rows of concrete blocks. But hidden in this monotony is one of the most carefully calculated urban experiments in history. The city is divided into districts that function as self-sustaining micro-cities. And this is not just in Novosibirsk. Countless Russian cities follow this pattern. But the micro-district plan was just one of many attempts to transform the very nature of how humans live. Once upon a time, Soviet landscape could have looked completely different. So why did the Soviet Union believe this would create the perfect city? And what actually happened when millions moved in? After the First World War, Russia was a mess. Cities were poor, overcrowded, and people living in them were divided. The newly established Soviet Union needed a desperate answer to its housing problems. Before Nikita Khrushchev introduced micro-districts in 1950s, three men were fighting for control. They each wanted to create the definite solution for how a Soviet citizen should live. The first concept was created by Disurbanists, led by Mikhail Okitovich. His plan was to stretch communities out across the whole country in long, thin lines. Families would live in small houses along endless roads, surrounded by nature but close to communal dining halls.
Мы должны растворить город в лесу и жить вдоль великих артерий республики.
Employment centers would be located at road junctions with bus services transporting workers from their houses. A true paradise for socialist worker, blending community with nature. But there was a problem. The Soviet Union's primary goal in the 1920s was rapid industrialization. The new nation needed to prove it was a superpower. Sure, the Disurbanist plan gave people houses. But just because you connect settlements with a bus doesn't mean it's an efficient way to maximize factory output. They needed a different answer. In 1925, a man named Viktor Vesnin gave it to them. He represented the urbanists, who wanted compact cities located directly around industry.
Дом рабочего – это не убежище, это часть промышленной машины. Мы не можем ждать автобуса, чтобы принести революцию на работу.
The factory would become the city center and its most important component. Up to 50,000 people would revolve their life around the work schedule of a single facility. But urbanists didn't just stop there. They wanted a totally communal existence. Residents were to live in massive social condensers, communal houses for 3,000 people. Private space was reduced to tiny sleeping cells. Every household activity was moved to communal facilities. This meant centralized kitchens, large eating halls, and communal laundries. The most extreme urbanists believe the state should even regulate the timing for waking up, washing, and walking to the dining hall.
Комната для общего пользования. Говорят, что она необходима как дыхание ноздрей и как пища.
The extreme versions of these early plans were never implemented. However, there are many unfamous cities such as Magnitogorsk, which were born out of urbanist drive for making the factory a center of existence. But as those cities grew, their vision started to crumble. Settlements created around a single source of work couldn't provide the same public services as a large metropolis. When a service was missing, getting it was a challenge. In many of those cities, the primary source of income was based on a single material like coal. Since the best mining spots were often remote, traveling to another city proved to be difficult. They needed to build metropolis, not detached factory towns. The Soviet Union turned to a more traditional solution: the Kvartal. This was a classic city block where buildings were arranged in a square with public services hidden in the interior. The grid was then repeated, creating neighborhoods and eventually a whole city. The idea was simple: have your direct needs covered in your own block, and if you needed something else, walk to the next one. It worked perfectly with Stalin's grand vision for Soviet housing. He wanted to build handcrafted brick buildings. These houses, called Stalinkas, had high ceilings, thick walls and spacious rooms.
Мы строим дворцы для народа. Каждый кирпич, который мы кладем, является свидетельством триумфа нашей идеологии.
However, those buildings didn't manage to house millions living in crowded barracks and basements. Traditional masonry was too slow for growing population. While the elites lived in luxury, the rest of population remained in overcrowded communal rooms. It wasn't what communism had promised. But there was a man who had a plan for solving it. Nikita Khrushchev and his team of architects thought of urbanism differently. They wanted to create safe, walkable neighborhoods. The concepts of the urbanists inspired them, but they had a vision to improve it.
Мы должны вернуть себе местный образ жизни, когда все необходимое находится всего в 15 минутах ходьбы от вашего дома.
Instead of detached cities, they would create the micro-districts. They became the fundamental, invisible cells of the Soviet cities. It was a radical shift from the traditional street toward a strictly planned system. A standard micro-district was defined by a 500-meter rule. Planners calculated exactly how many shops were needed per person. The goal was to ensure that every grocery store, cafeteria and shop was within a short walk from any apartment. Schools and kindergartens were placed even closer, so children never had to cross a major street. These districts were bounded by massive motor roads, but the inside kept traffic to a minimum.
Внутри наших микрорайонов транзитный транспорт строго запрещен. Матери больше не придется беспокоиться о безопасности своих детей, ведь они будут ходить от дома до школы пешком.
They became safe pedestrian islands filled with rows of prefabricated panel buildings. Each district was inhabited by about 10,000 people. The system aimed to erase class differences entirely. It was an attempt to create an ordered, predictable environment for the socialist way of life. But there was a side effect. Because the micro-districts are purely residential, workplaces are located miles away. This means long daily commutes to get to work. And the districts themselves are criticized for monotony and depersonalization. The large gaps between buildings created non-spaces. Huge chunks of land that belonged to everyone and no one. The Soviet dream was to build a machine for living. But as with all utopian plans, it didn't prove as solid as their leader's ego. However, there is one thing they have done exceptionally well. They managed to create a 15-minute city that most countries struggle with to this day. The blocks might be depressing, but the planning behind them is in its own way genius.